Welcome to another episode of Brew with an Agronomist, where we talk agronomy with some of Pioneer's great agronomists, this time Chris Olbach, the area agronomist for southwestern Ontario, St. Thomas to Niagara. Chris, welcome.
Yeah, thanks for coming. Welcome to Belmont.
Well, beautiful spot. You've got a beautiful spot here. We've got a beautiful bean field that fortunately Randy at Glen Valley Seeds has kind of let us take over here. Here we've got just a field that's really come up really well, despite the fact that we are pretty late in the growing season. This is, you'd want beans this time of year to be much higher normally. And you, out of all the Pioneer agronomists that I get to talk to, you've probably got the most variability in terms of how growers have gotten along this season with getting beans in. Talk a little bit about that variability and what you're seeing from growers.
Yeah, so, well, just to give you a background, this was planted June 13. So we were in here when it was finally fit to get ready. We've just had pop-up showers after pop-up showers, eh? And so yeah, this would typically look a lot different, but you know, from basically the row routes I cover, St. Thomas to Niagara, I've got everything from the heaviest clay, lacustrine clay you can think of, to the lightest sands, and then some of the nicest loams the province has to offer, right? And but this year, everything seems a little flipped, right? So we're just wrapping up planting here.
It's one of those conversations that we've had because of the challenges of just wet conditions for a lot of growers, particularly on those heavier soils. You know, I think we were discussing earlier about a field like this as the testament to, you know, what kind of emergence you can get, the success you can get when you do wait for it to be fit.
Yeah, and that's just something that we live all the time in my area. You know, on the clays, you need to be patient, and you need to be ready for when that soil is ready, right? So in this case, you know, that the rains made it so on this field, and usually we'd be in it a little earlier, but we definitely waited for the right conditions, and you know, this is in behind here. We've also planted a Z series plot, a soybean plot, and yeah, so it was a long time coming, waiting to do that, but you see the result here, right? We can manage this stand going forward. We're going to get good canopy closure and cover once the time's right. It just came a little later, right?
So then just talk a little bit about, you know, in terms of that yield stability is a big one, but just that belief that a grower, you know, they plant their beans late, they're not panicking because we still think we can get a pretty good yield out of that. How does Z Series fit in with that or take it to the next level?
For sure. For us, you know, in the Pioneer brand, we've always focused on having the right soybeans in all the maturity groups that we do offer in Ontario. And there's quite a range. If I go down by the lake, I'm growing longer season maturity. And as I move north, you know, needs change and rotations change, and the soybeans need to change with that. So for us, a lot of the rotational aspects can be, you know, you can position soybeans for that. And having earlier season varieties that work well for us is super important. We're kind of exploring what that means with the new ones we're launching in terms of maturity, and this has been a great year to do that because a lot of folks have looked at what their opportunities are as plans change, right? And that's important. So yeah, so I'm excited for that component, but also just having protection in terms of soybean cyst nematode, white mold, and Phytophthora are really important for all the geographies that I service with the reps. So I think my reps are excited for more performance in that direction all the time and in earlier maturities, and so am I. So for that yield stability component, that's really important. So and that's what you're going to see out of this behind you.
Well, and I do want to take a time to kind of walk this field a little bit with you, but in terms of when we do talk about, you talk about SEN, you talk about white mold, you talk about Phytophthora, like how does Z Series really build on the success that the Pioneer genetics have already had to further protect, in which, you know, probably a year like this is one we're going to have to watch even more so for some of that.
Yeah. So we've been breeding soybeans for about 50 years at Pioneer, right? And as we move into Z Series soybeans, that marks another step down the path of the breeding engine at Pioneer. And our philosophy behind breeding, it really hasn't changed, right? The monikers we give each bean does, and but the philosophy doesn't, right? And it's more about providing basically a well-rounded package to each grower in terms of what their needs are. So yeah, when I talk about Phytophthora, I mean the first 60 days on those clays can be really important to protect against Phytophthora, and the genetics is a really big component to that. You know, you take the area I used to cover in Ottawa Valley, a lot of white mold concerns through there. And so genetics is certainly a big part of that, and we've been making improvements with that all the time. These Z-series soybeans are just a mark of that success we've had. So I can keep going with soybean cyst nematode, SDS, all the things that kind of try to throw a wrench in our plans when we grow soybeans here. Our beans are improving all the time with respect to that, and that's what really gets me excited about the Z-series soybeans.
Mm-hmm. Well, and this goes back to probably my favorite line comes from Evelyn on the soybean breeding side, in just the case of, like, the yield's important. Don't get anybody wrong. Like, you gotta have yield to go with it. But what's going to rob that yield is all these diseases, all these things that's going to attack it, and the importance to be able to protect against those things is really what's ultimately going to get the yield. Because it's great if you have a bean that in perfect conditions has a great yield, but as soon as you put it in the real world, that's not what's going to happen. It's going to get attacked, and you've got to protect it.
Yeah. I've brought Evelyn out to a lot of my fields in in Haldeman County and Niagara, and right through back. We'll tour through most of my part of the province, my catchment, and that's something that's come up at every stop we've visited. Right, is certain genetics standing out from a standpoint of what we've launched with Z-series. Right, so it's exciting to see her excitement about it, and deploying that in the field with the reps that I work with that do a really good job of positioning those. So.
Yeah. So then, as we said, we've got this great field of beans. Now you look at a pile of fields, especially if you think of what's planted from, St. Thomas to Niagara. And you're kind of known around Pioneer as, being able to have some pretty cool tech in your truck to be able to help you do that. So how do you go about, a grower's got it, a sales rep's got their, farms planted. How do you go about then doing some scouting and really being able to assist, growers to know what they're dealing with?
Yeah. So you mentioned a bit of a UAV that I use to do stand counts and stand evaluations. Yeah. So that's been a big part of something I've been working with for the last 5 years as an agronomist, is seeing how that can play into evaluating a stand. Right. So whether you're taking these soybeans planted here or anywhere for that matter, I can do a quick assessment, not only of certain spots in the field, but basically like on an acre grid, get a bit of a idea of how things vary across the field. So it's been really helpful for that. But then, just on soybeans, more about like where the gaps are and where holes are in the field and in conditions that are not so fit. So I imagine on this field we're going to have pretty good results come back, a pretty even stand here, not too many gaps. Other fields, you kind of want to pinpoint what's going on in the field in terms of how maybe the planter performed or the conditions were at the time of planting, and get an understanding of how we need to move forward for the field as a whole, right? Which is really valuable to a lot of growers. So that's kind of what I do with that standpoint. But then, the next 60 days really matter, right? Now it's all up to the genetics that are in that bag and starting to perform that way. So we won't stop walking fields on a lot of cases till the flowers are set and the pods are set and we have a crop, right? So, there's always things to look for. Some of the things I look for early on are diseases like Phytophthora, root rot is a big one for a lot of my area. And so we try to evaluate our genetics for that. So that's what I'm, one of the things I do at a plot like this if the opportunity arises. So
then can we maybe put that in the air?
For sure.
And then we'll do a little bit of scouting, and just give me an idea here in terms of what you would do day to day.
Yeah. So a lot of times working with the conditions that we've had this year, the last 2 weeks have been kind of around how, things weren't exactly fit, and maybe conditions weren't exactly perfect for emergence. So what do we need to do or not do when it comes to that? And that's a very challenging decision to make sometimes. So the reps work pretty hard with our growers to decide what to do in that case, which is always helpful. So this, the drone tries to take a little bit of the emotion out of it, and maybe we can find a better path forward, per se. But that's a lot of what we're trying to do with stand evaluations this time here. Other ways, just to see what kind of crop we have setting up for the season is usually helpful for management going forward. Yeah. So
cool. Well, let's get the drone up.
Sounds good. Yeah. So it'll run its course, right, and count every acre, and give us an estimate of gaps per acre.
So it's doing the counting. You're not taking a picture and then like counting individual?
Not it's doing the counting all
doing the work
itself.
for
You
you.
train it to do one thing really, really well. So in this case, it's counting gaps. It's not counting plants. In corn, we can count actually individual plants.
Yeah.
So I get more of an estimate of, how's the stand in terms of thickness and uniformity with this.
Really?
Yeah.
And so now you were kind of messing around there, setting things up on it. Like what types of things are you setting up? Like basically, how hard is it to get this started?
Yeah. As it flies, I'm not controlling it or anything, but I do control, the path it will fly. So that's the biggest thing, is setting up the proper path of what you want to see, how dense you want to count. So an acre, half acre grid, 3 acre grid. I like an acre because you get a bit of an estimate of how the field is in the center. And then, you kind of want to avoid headlands or anything that might be in the way. It's about 50 feet in the air, and it can take, from that, a 1/10 of an acre snapshot rather than a 1,000th of an acre boot count.
You talk about stand counts is really what it's doing.
Yep.
When you're looking at that, you're looking at a field like this. What basically are you going to do with that information?
So with that, a lot of times it's diagnostic. Something has happened that the stands aren't quite fit. So I look for patterns in the actual images. For the majority of the time, that's the biggest component I'm looking at. But other times, it's just, what does it mean to have a certain amount of gaps per acre, or achieve the stand that we did at a certain, under certain conditions, right? So try to learn as much as we can from that. And we can do it fast. Like this takes 6 minutes to fly, this chunk of close to, probably 30 acres here, right? So, that's kind of what we're after, right? So.
And then you were also mentioning, there's other things that we're really watching for in terms of when we are looking at soybeans that are this kind of freshly emerged. What are some of the other things when you come into a field that you are looking for from freshly emerged beans?
Yeah, there's a lot this year. Just we've had so much water, and that's really changed what we're seeing in terms of say a year like last year, we had the driest May that every farmer had seen in 35 years. So that was quite a bit different, right, in terms of what the conditions the beans emerging faced, right? So one of the things I'm looking for, you can see right down here, right, the cracking out of the soil, right, is that bean going to make it? Is it going to contribute to the stand, right? The drone necessarily can't pick that up for me, but it'll count that as a gap, right? So the thickness of the stand in terms of that, right? Some of these late emergers as well, right? So we want to make sure that we're getting enough soybeans emerge to canopy and give us good sunlight capture and basically weed suppression in a tougher condition, right? You don't want weeds growing in the places where the stands are thinner, right? But soybeans can be very, very forgiving from that standpoint when they do have big challenges they face, right? So, things like residue cover, or, some of the more bigger challenges you get with insect feeding and those kinds of things, right? So all those factors, herbicide carryover or injury from that, we're looking for that. There's a lot to assess in the spring. So here you can kind of review the stand, right? All the yellow boxes marking where the gaps in the stand are, right? So that's really useful to show if there's any large gaps or areas of that, in terms of if we have to make a replant decision or that across the field, right? So it'll give you, the spacing between each seed and the gap count on average, and if it's better or worse in the field, right? So you can see across as we move, where there's maybe a little more gaps, but really tight margin of difference here. And a really good stand.
So then let's talk a little bit about, because there's two things that probably happen in that, right? You look at that and you say, okay, it's time to replant. That's an easy one, right? Because you've got a better analysis of, rather than just walking a little bit of it, you've got a much wider analysis. That must come in handy for growers.
Yeah, we're trying to get closer to maybe assigning a percentage of the field that's been impacted by standing water, insect feeding, all kinds of things. Right. So, and hopefully that gets us closer to, a decision at the end of the day. It takes a lot of walking too. You can't replace everything with these, but they sure do help give you a perspective across the field. So I've been working a lot with reps using this kind of technology, seeing where it applies and where it applies to farms, right?
So then, but in a case like this, we're late in the season already. If we had found a poor stand count, maybe we don't get a chance to replant. You know, what kind of advice do you have a grower who maybe the stand count isn't quite there, but a replant's not going to be an option? How can we still get the most out of those beans?
Yeah, I think not letting your foot off the, you know, depending on, you know, how big those gaps are, right, and how much of the field is affected. But if you're looking at smaller areas, maybe there's some things you can do to keep the weeds down in those areas. You know, like take a look at, you know, what could be done with cover crops, or maybe, you know, just even broadcasting some more beans in there to make sure the weeds don't come through. Those kinds of things, you know, you can always try. But you know, don't forget that you still have a field there of beans that you can maybe manage a certain way, and we're hoping that we can do that in a lot of cases. You know, as time goes on, and you know, beans will surprise you. You know,
they are more forgiving.
They're more resilient than we give them credit for,
Yep.
and we're trying to add to that resilience all the time.
Well, and Z-Series must be part of that in terms of, you know, as you said, like a year like this where you do have so much variability, as we talked before, about how can we still get the yield we're expecting or that we need as growers, despite challenges that we know are going to come every year.
Yeah. So the bean crop's only a product of what it was the day before, right? So we try and get uniformity, and we try and get a solid stand like we see here. But it doesn't always work out that way. But that's not to worry. There's, you know, a lot going into that seed to help you get through a lot of the challenges that you may face later on in the season that can make a tough crop worse, right? So that's kind of the yield stability component. And then there's a lot of things we're going to do with these beans to push them beyond where we thought they're possible. So I'm pretty excited about that at the same time, right? And there's still lots of opportunities to do that this year.
So then on a field like this, you know, like it, as we said, it's a great stand. What kind of seeding rate would have been put on here?
Yeah, so Randy and I and his son there, we planted this June 13, right? So we were a little bit higher than we would normally be at around like 185. Usually we'd go a little, you know, 170, that kind of range for this kind of ground. But yeah, that's the reason we do that, just to, you know, to take a look at the season we have left, you know, how many beans should we have on an acre of ground, and try and get that, you know, dialed in as best we can, right? Because we want a little bit more growth with the season we have left. Some fields are starting to flower this time of year and that kind of thing, whereas that's, you know, we're not quite there yet with these, with just pushing a first stripe foliate, right? So that's kind of the seeding rate we went there. And of course, yeah, one thing I've learned with the drone is things are not always as you plan to set out. If you set for 180, you know, odds are you're going to lose some along the way, right? And it's due to various things. You know, the biggest thing would be conditions and you know, how the beans went in. Right?
But I think that goes to the will that a lot of growers have, and even from an agronomy standpoint, when we look at, you know, what a field that might be susceptible to white mold looks like. You know, the advice has been, let's lower that seeding rate. From a cost perspective, let's lower that seeding rate. Well, I think it brings up the importance then of, you know, whether it's, you know, the new lineup of Z-Series or whatever bean it is, we need that bean emerged if we're going to lower that seeding rate then.
For sure. I've always kind of held to this, right? That the lower you go with seeding rate, the more important it is that every bean comes up, right? And we take a look at that in terms of our genetics, screening, and a lot of like our research locations and pre-commercial stuff. We'll assess a soybean for how well it emerges, right? And that's a component of that. But also you take a look at some of the seed treatments that have been added to that. I think that's a component too, right? Made a lot of beans a lot better in terms of when they go to work in the field early on for that first 60 days, right? It's really important. So that all comes together with our Z-Series soybeans quite nicely for us, because we've been doing a lot of work studying how these are gonna perform and the difference in challenges and environments they're gonna have. So yeah, that excites me about what we're launching this year. So.